There's no getting around that the Pelicans' 85-118 loss to the New York Knicks is an absolute embarrassment. It speaks to bigger problems than just injuries. In today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you what's going on with this team and what New Orleans needs to do. It's the Monday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans, and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NolaJake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Monday, and we are coming to you after the Pelicans lose 85-118 to the New York Knicks, an absolute, look, there's no getting around it, embarrassment of a loss for New Orleans. The issues you're seeing on the court with this team are deeper than just injuries, and I'll tell you why in today's episode. So yeah, it is an angry cast here on Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, coming to you basically every single day. And look, we are in a bad mood here on Locked On Pelicans because that one was rough. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. So let's get into this one. 118-85. The Pelicans looked pathetic in this game. This team. So let's start with this. One of the things that I had been talking a lot about the past couple of weeks in losses is that you were seeing moral victories for New Orleans. And I truly thought that that's what we were seeing. But moral victories only matter if you actually improve. You go, oh, we were close. Here's what we need to tweak. Here's the changes that we make. You know, you're supposed to get better as the season goes on. You're supposed to learn from those defeats. You get a little bit healthier and you turn them into victories. That is not what's happening here in New Orleans whatsoever. And truthfully, when you watch this game, when you watch that game against the Toronto Raptors, it does feel a little bit like this team is regressing. Now, in the middle of that was a competitive loss to the Memphis Grizzlies, but they still lost that game by 11. And you can't say that that's particularly great, even though they managed to take the lead and, you know, keep it close going into the second half at times. But overall, you know, or they were close in the first half, and then Memphis started to kind of run away with it in the second half. You know, but these basically past three games, this is pathetic. New Orleans had 28 points at halftime. They scored 10 in the first quarter. None of this is okay here. Look, it's one thing to lose. It is one thing to lose if you're being competitive. If it's a 2-point loss and you're still injured, you're on the road against a good team. Certainly, we can look at that and go, okay, here's what you do and what you build off of. And that's honestly what some of the losses you saw from New Orleans were. Those were those moral victories, even though they were L's in the win-loss column here. There's no moral victory here. There's no moral victory in this one. The Knicks did everything they wanted, both on offense and defense. On defense, the Pelicans looked lost. They didn't look like they had a game plan. They didn't look like they knew, to quote Antonio Daniels, know your personnel. Did they know the Knicks personnel at all? Did they have any clue how to defend Karl-Anthony Towns in this one? No, they didn't. They just straight up kind of let them do whatever they wanted. Did they know what to do with Bridges? No, you saw late and lazy closeouts on the 3-point line. You saw them not defending the interior. You saw them let Karl-Anthony Towns just drive and attack. You saw them falling for traps set by Josh Hart. All of those things. They made this so unbelievably easy for the New York Knicks to win. Then on offense, what did you see? Nothing, right? You saw them just go ISO after isolation. And that comes one game after they played against the Memphis Grizzlies where they had some pace, where they looked like they were moving the ball. You saw a flash of it here, a flash of it there in this game against the Knicks. One possession here, you know, a couple minutes, half hour later, another possession of it there. You saw some of that, but nothing consistently here, right? You didn't see them make the Knicks work for it or the Grizzlies work for it whatsoever. You saw them just turning the ball over. There was a possession in I forget if it was the second quarter or the third quarter, where the Pelicans just turned it over on a dribble handoff, right? About as simple of an action as you can run. And New Orleans was just so lackadaisical about it. They basically just handed the ball to the New York Knicks. The Knicks blew that up. The Knicks knew exactly what New Orleans was trying to do, and they pressed the point of attack, and it turned into turnovers and then easy points for the New York Knicks. This is unacceptable. Look, you don't have Zion. You don't have Brandon Ingram. You don't have Jose Alvarado. You don't have Herb Jones. No one's expecting this team to be a title contender right now. But can you not go down or score only 28 points in the first half of a game? Can you have more pride than that, it feels like? And that's not what this team was playing with whatsoever in this one. They were down 41 in the first half. I don't care about the injuries. This goes beyond that, right? Lose by 10 would be one thing. To go down 41 where you looked just inept, unprepared, all of those things, it's not okay here. It's about how you approach the game. It's about how you play. And they failed on every single front. F minus, minus, minus here. Now, maybe that means you change coaches. Maybe you've just got to wait and see the team healthy. Who knows here? But what is happening now is absolutely unacceptable. Those moral victory losses, they suck, they burn, but you're like, yeah, we can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel here. This team will get better. You didn't see anything of that in here. They looked far worse than they did a couple of weeks ago. And now you have DeJounte Murray back. You have CJ McCollum back. You have Trey Murphy back. You're not supposed to look worse when there's more talent out there on the court. Something seems fundamentally broken here in New Orleans with that. You know, Willie Green was talking about after the game, oh, these guys just need some more confidence. Once they have confidence, they'll play better. How do they get confidence? How do they get confidence? Maybe put them in position to succeed and not just run isolation after isolation. Put them in position to succeed and maybe their confidence improves and then they'll do what you want. But when you're just running isolation after isolation with guys that shouldn't be doing that, no, you're not going to be in a good position here. We've seen them run some offense. Why aren't you doing that here? It's just an unbelievably disappointing game. And look, some of this it's DeJounte Murray's second game back, right? This may be preseason for him here. You know, Trey is still kind of rounding into form from it. CJ McCollum is still rounding into form from everything too. But you shouldn't look this bad. Again, you lose by 5. We're going to be here being like, all right, they're building something. You know, if this team were to be healthy, maybe they're good. What does that mean going forward? We don't get to say any of that here because that's not the situation that they found themselves in. Losing like you did 25 plus points to the Toronto Raptors isn't okay. I don't care about the injuries. It's about your approach, your process, and they're not doing that well here at all. We'll do a deeper dive on some of the comments from players because one of my notes is like, are players just fed up here with what's going on? Some of their quotes make it feel like it. DeJounte Murray, you know, talking after that Toronto's Raptors loss saying that's, quote, embarrassing. CJ McCollum's like, we got to do better in practice. Who sets the tone for practice? It's coach. Now, the players got to do it too, but then make some changes here. If you went into the season being like, oh yeah, these guys, they don't practice hard, you wouldn't have kept them. So something from a process standpoint feels very, very wrong here. And that means this, they've got to make some sort of change. What that change is can be open to a number of things, but they do need to make a change. Something needs to be different because you can't keep doing this. Now they get to play tonight on the second night of a back-to-back against Atlanta. Like, it's just not okay, right? You know, and look, let's say this. When are things going to necessarily get better? And let's look at the roster construction coming up here next for New Orleans, because that is a big part of it too, right? We kind of focus on the coaching and that side of things here, but let's look at the front office coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's your favorite part of the holidays? What moments and things make you happy and cozy at home during December? How do you stay cozy during those winter months? For some, wrapping up in a blanket with a mug of hot chocolate or watching a movie with family is the best way to spend the month of December. Therapy is a great way to bring yourself some comfort that never goes away, even when the seasons change. Whether you're looking for positive coping skills, how to set boundaries, basically just being empowered to be the best version of you, that's what therapy can do. It's not just for those who have experienced major trauma. Life doesn't have an instruction manual. Maybe you just need to talk to somebody to figure out how to approach a certain issue. Maybe you're just dealing with something and you need to get it off of your chest. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. What I love about it is it's entirely online. I've actually used it before. I don't have time to go to a doctor's office. Here, it's just convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. So you just fill out a brief questionnaire. You're going to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch at any time for no additional charge. So find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast coming to you like nobody else does. And we aren't going to be pulling any punches here. There are bigger issues here in New Orleans than just the injuries right now. And this Knicks game really showed that to you here. So let's get into more of that here in just a moment. But first, go check out the Locked On Pelicans newsletter daily, Monday through Friday to y'all. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. And start your day with the all-new free Locked On Pelicans newsletter. Maybe you're just kind of exhausted. You don't have time to consume all the articles, the shows, the podcasts, this stuff about the team. You can just get it in your inbox. Don't worry about it. Just go to LockedOnDaily.com and sign up. There's also really great league coverage in there too. It's making me smarter. I've used a lot of the stuff on the show here too, so it's really great. Make sure you give it a read. Go to LockedOnDaily.com. So what I also thought was interesting about this game was the Pelicans, kind of felt like they were mailing it in a little bit. Maybe they're doing a stealth tank here, and we'll look at that later in the week, I think. Now, I don't think it's exactly that, but when is help coming for New Orleans? We have no idea when Brandon Ingram is going to be playing, and the news broke the other day, and I hinted at this last week, I think on Friday on the show, that he was signing with Clutch. And I don't think it's that big of a deal, but that's an episode probably on Wednesday, probably on Wednesday that we're going to kind of spend the whole show on, maybe tomorrow too, depending on how this game goes against the Atlanta Hawks tonight here. But we have no idea when he's going to be playing. He went from questionable a few games ago to out, updated on the injury report, out on Saturday for a Sunday game. Like, it was just like, yeah, this dude ain't playing. And maybe that he's not playing because it's on the front night of a back-to-back. Willie Green kind of hinted at after this game that maybe it's going to be longer, but it's listed as calf soreness. He's out. This is kind of something that happens with him where it seems like these injuries linger a little bit. If it was a hamstring strain, it's a different thing. We kind of know the approach to those. When it's things like soreness, those seem a little bit more nebulous. We also don't have an update on Zion, though he was with the team, but we're kind of at that time frame when we heard they're expecting him to be out probably through January. In early January, we expect his return. It's going to be too late then. We talked about this the other day, that playoffs are basically kind of out of the reach for New Orleans at this point in time. And when you look at them, those moral victories are supposed to be like, oh, they'll turn it around. I don't think they're turning it around anytime soon right now. And I'm usually like the optimistic one when it comes to this team. A big part of this is roster construction and roster construction issues. This team, in terms of roster, is not built to play the way they want. And that makes it also feel like it's only going to get worse before things get better, whenever that's going to be. They had an openly stated goal of, let's take 43s per game. They've said that for 2 years now. They haven't taken 43s in a single game at any point this season. That says something here, right? A team right now, and this deserves its whole episode, and I've wanted to do, we just don't have time to do it. This team doesn't have Ingram or Zion playing right now. The reason this team will never take 43s per game is because you're too high usage players. And there's a stat that you can go look up yourself on NBA.com/stats or basketball-reference called usage, USG%. And it's a really good stat for kind of understanding, how guys are used. And the definition of this is an estimate of the percentage of teams' plays used by a player while they were on the floor. So does it result in a turnover, a field goal attempt, or free throws, essentially? There might be one or two other things in there, but basically like guys kind of finishing the play with a shot or something else, right? So it's the possessions they use. Zion Williamson has a usage rate of 35%. So when he's on the court, basically 35% of all their shot attempts or something are kind of going through him. DeJounte Murray's at 32.4. Brandon Ingram is at 31. Let's look at Zion at 35 and Ingram at 31. Right there, and those two guys share the court a lot. That's over 60% of your possessions are being used by those two guys. Zion doesn't shoot threes. Ingram doesn't shoot enough threes, though he's trying this year to his credit. So if those guys are using the majority of your possessions, 2/3, right? It's 66% between those two. You're not going to take a ton of threes because that's not in their bag. It's not what they do. Whereas if you go to like Steph Curry, who has a high usage rate too, similar to these guys, but he takes more threes, your threes are going to go up. If a guy who doesn't take threes is using the majority of your possessions, you're not going to get threes. Everyone else basically needs to do it at a very high rate in terms of frequency. That's not totally realistic here. But you don't have Ingram playing. You don't have Zion playing. To only take 27 3-point attempts is bad. Now, we don't want them just jacking up threes. Just taking threes to just take threes. That's not it. It's creating 40 good 3-point looks per game. They're not even doing that, right? Messi isn't a shooter. You have Javonte Green. He's not a shooter. He took just 2 shot attempts. Jeremiah Robinson-Earl isn't a shooter. Brandon Boston Jr. is a mid-range guy. Their roster, as it is constructed, will never hit 43s, even when the 2 main guys that hold you back from shooting 43s per game aren't playing, because these guys don't shoot threes. Jeremiah Robinson-Earl went through a long stretch this season where he just wanted to take mid-range jumpers. That's what Brandon Boston Jr. wants to do. Javonte Green doesn't feel confident as an offensive threat whatsoever. Right? Antonio Reeves has struggled after just 1 breakout game. Elfrid Payton's not a 3-point shooter. DeJounte Murray took 6, but went 0 for 6 in this one. CJ in this game took just 3. What are we doing here? Now, you look at this roster, it's just not built to hoist the amount of threes that they want. They've built a roster that can't play the style that they want to play. That's not good. That speaks to, a bad vision at the top. A bad vision at the top. That is David Griffin. That is the front office kind of neglecting some of this. Now, they were a little bit hamstrung in some of this, truthfully. If you're going to try and build around Zion and BI, and those are the players they had, you can only kind of play the hand that you're dealt. They had number 1 overall pick. It was going to be Zion. We don't need to debate that. Right? They got Brandon Ingram and got a really good trade for Anthony Davis. You got good players. That's what you've got to build around. Sometimes, you're just dealt a bad hand and there's just nothing you can do. And so while they've had some misses, they've also had some good things. But the roster isn't constructed in the way to play like they want. Really kind of as simple as that, I think. And that's one of the reasons why it feels like it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think there are probably going to be some big changes this offseason based on how this season is going right now. And at least then you'll have some players on this team that others will want. You can trade some, and you can maybe go through more of a proper rebuild. That doesn't sound fun. It's what they need to do. It's probably what they should have done around Zion at the beginning. We'll look back on that later. That'll probably be closer to the off season. But right now, when you look at the roster, it's just, look, you're missing a ton of talent still, and that makes these other guys better. But you can run plays for CJ McCollum. You can do other things with these guys, but it shouldn't be, Brandon Boston Jr. and some others taking such a high usage rate if, that's not going to do what you want. I don't know if there's answers on the roster here. Antonio Reeves had that really great game and then has really, really struggled since then, right? They don't have another center outside of Yves Messi, really. They probably should give Carlo more run here. Played 9 minutes in this after they recalled him from the G League. Trey Jemison played 14. Daniel Tice played 7. Yves Messi played 20. They're getting nothing in terms of offensive production, really, from the big man spot. Messi has been good. Don't get me wrong. I've been really impressed with some of the rim protection and the blocking. But the offense definitely isn't there. Or at least they're not using him in a way that really unlocks him here. But it speaks to roster construction. There isn't enough shooting on this roster at all. You could take 43s without Zion and Ingram if you had guys that wanted to take those shots or were good at taking those shots, and they don't have that. And that's a big part of the problem that we're seeing with it right now. We can talk about coaching, we can talk about scheme, and look, that needs to be better. We just hit on that in the first segment here. More than anything, I just want them to be better prepared. I don't think you have the players to really do a whole lot here. right? Okay, so you don't play Javonte Green. You need the defense, let's say, but you go to Antonio Reeves, who in 20 minutes in this game didn't do much of anything and kind of has struggled recently. I was really high on him. He has moments, but he's just not there yet. He's a rookie second-round pick. That makes sense. There's no cavalry coming, right? There's nothing that's going to help this team immediately, and that just means it's going to get worse before things maybe equalize or they kind of realize that the season is over. And look, it feels like the season is over right now. If we were to go look at the standings, I don't know what it is currently. I'm recording this fairly late because I was traveling today. I watched that game, by the way, on League Pass on a plane, and the Wi-Fi struggled about as much as the Pelicans did on that flight. The Pelicans at this point are 15th they're going to be tied for 15th, I think, with the Utah Jazz in the Western Conference. They're at this point 7.5 games back of the 10th seed. Yeah, you could say, it's December, but that is a lot to try and overcome. That is a lot of games to try and overcome, and that's not easy to do, which is going to lead us to our next point. You got to make these tough decisions now. You've got to make these tough decisions now. You got to force it to happen. I'll explain what I mean. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle all the NFL and NBA action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL and NBA all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats of live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you can just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Maybe it's just bet against the Pelicans for the foreseeable future here till they get some of these guys back. And if you win your first $5 bet, you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets. Again, if you win your first $5 bet, and you can do that over at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Let me know what you think needs to change. I wonder what you might say in the comments down below. Is it David Griffin? Is it Willie Green? Is it all of the above? Those are the type of things that we're going to be talking a lot about because, look, this season has just gone off the rails for New Orleans already. And they're in a rough spot. There's no getting around that here. Maybe Ingram, maybe Zion coming back can help stabilize them a little bit. But at that point, they need those guys like today, and they're not coming back today. So that presents, I think, a pretty big problem for New Orleans. And what that means is, we talked about this last week on the show. The worst place you can be is in that middle tier of the NBA. Not in the playoffs, but not a bottom 5 team. Kind of in that no man's land, as we call it. It's like a mid-range shot. So that's the worst spot that you can be in because the way you acquire talent is truthfully at the top of the draft. There's been enough studies on this that you have a far better chance of drafting an all-star in the top 5 than anywhere else. It's not even close. Yes, there's some outliers like Nikola Jokic in the second round and other players, but for the most part, the talent in the NBA, the top end talent is a top 5, top 10 draft pick. So New Orleans needs to ensure that they're going to be there. Now, they're doing a real good job of that right now with where they are, right? Like this team is not looking good. They're getting outscored by about 8 points per game in terms of points for, points allowed, and that's with a couple of wins in there. That's not good. So they're doing a great job of losing games themselves, but when they do get healthy, there's probably enough talent just to win games on talent alone. That means you'll gain ground in the standings. I was going to be like, you're going to get worse, but you're actually better. You're going to be further and further away then at that point from a top 4 pick. Washington is going to be in there. Utah is going to be in there. I would imagine Toronto and Charlotte will too, along with Chicago. Philly feels like they'll get better, but we'll see. Washington, by the way, has lost 14 straight games. New Orleans has now lost 8 in a row. They're 1-9 in their last 10. They have the second best odds for the top pick. Really, the top 3 team, the worst 3 teams have the equal odds for the top for the first overall pick. New Orleans has a 52.1% chance at a top 4 pick in a loaded, talent-changing draft. You don't actually want to get better at this point. Look, I want them to win. I always want this team to win. Even when, it's in their best interest to tank. But tanking is in their best interest right now. So they need to make tough decisions sooner rather than later. Trading away guys like CJ, Ingram, whoever it is that you might be moving, Zion, if that's what it comes to it. Making these hard decisions now would be the smartest thing for the team. Look at what they did with Brandon Ingram here, holding on to him too long because they couldn't make a tough decision last offseason. Or not this past one, the one before that, Scoot Henderson year. And now the position that they're in. Trading guys away when they still have years left on their deal is the best thing that you can do. Look at the pretty decent return, I thought, that the Minnesota Timberwolves got for Karl-Anthony Towns. Look at what the Brooklyn Nets got for Bridges and what he did in this game to New Orleans. 31 points, I think, is what he had in this one. Making these moves now is better than making it later. And there's only going to be so many teams willing to absorb some of those contracts, whether that's CJ's, Ingram's, or others. And if another team beats you to the punch, well, then you're stuck. And that's not what this team should be doing. You actually have a chance to kind of get a jump on tanking on other teams by making some of these moves now. Do I expect this team to do that? If I were David Griffin, I wouldn't be. Your job's on the line. You trade away and dump some good players. It basically means that you're getting fired and you're, building the war chest for your replacement. No one really wants to do that. But ownership, Gail Benson and kind of her lieutenants there need to force this to happen. They need to force this to happen to do what's in the best interest of the franchise, which as of today, when I'm recording this, particularly after a really it was embarrassing loss. You've got to make some bigger changes here. You don't want to fire Willie Green. You can fire him at the end of the year if that's what you feel you need to do here. But the roster needs to have a dramatic overhaul, it feels like. And they were going to need to do this anyway. When we did the mailbag the other day, and it was like, what day will they commit to tanking? It was like, well, it's February 6th at 3:01 p.m. Eastern. The second the trade deadline's over, because they need to make a move before that. But don't wait that long. Just do it now. That's the smart thing. Get a jump on another team trying to dump a player into cap space on Detroit or something like that. Go make those moves now so that you can be worse, and then you can start this rebuild or whatever, a retool, whatever it's going to be, off on a better foot, and you don't get beaten to the punch by others. You've got to make tough decisions now. And with the way they looked in this game, an absolute embarrassment. You had more talent on the court than you did a couple weeks ago, and you look worse. That speaks to the bigger issues here in New Orleans that aren't going to be fixed anytime soon. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know what you think in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. We got a lot to come. I actually have like a whole list of notes that I wrote on this flight about shows that I want to do. I want to look at some of their defense in transition, the turnovers. Literally, I have one that goes, show idea, even Pelicans players are fed up. And they are. Hear the quotes, and they're pretty damning. We'll talk about that later in the week here on Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow for another game recap, and we'll see what happens. See y'all next time.